It was salvaged from the ocean's black maw, a ship's bell from a 16th century Spanish galleon, silent for generations. But when mounted on a British frigate, its silence broke. Every midnight, unbidden, it began to toll. Not arbitrarily, but with a terrifying precision. Only when the frigate drifted directly above a sunken wreck, each chime measuring the exact number of souls lost in that watery grave. And in the reverberations, some sailors swore they heard more than sound, faint, spectral whispers calling out the very names of the drowned. The HMS Serpent, a formidable British frigate, cut through the Atlantic swells in the late autumn of 1798. A recent acquisition adorned her quarterdeck, a heavy bronze bell, recovered from the wreckage of the Spanish galleon Santa Isabella, lost 2 centuries prior off the coast of Hispaniola. It was meant as a trophy, a symbol of naval dominance. It became something else entirely. For weeks, the bell remained silent, an inert mass of darkened metal. Then, on the night of October 14th, as the Serpent navigated a treacherous stretch of sea known for its shifting currents, the first chime echoed across the darkened decks. It was midnight. No hand had touched the clapper. Captain Elias Thorne, a man of iron discipline and colder logic, recorded the anomaly in his log. Bell from Santa Isabella chimed thrice unbidden at Iwazozo 0 hours. Origin unknown, men unsettled. He dismissed it as a trick of the wind, or perhaps residual stress from its recovery. But the chiming persisted, always at midnight, always unprompted. The crew, hardened by sea and battle, initially grumbled, then grew uneasy. Superstition, a constant companion on the deep, began to spread. It wasn't until a grizzled master-at-arms, old Silas Blackwood, noticed a pattern. Each time the bell tolled, the Serpent had passed over a known wreck site. On November 3rd, the bell rang 53 times. A chilling, rhythmic peal that vibrated through the hull. Blackwood, a walking archive of maritime disasters, consulted old charts and whispered records. 53 tolls, the exact number of souls lost when the merchant brig, the Nightingale, foundered in a sudden squall at that very position 36 years earlier. Verification from Admiralty records, though slow to arrive, confirmed the grim tally. The officers, initially skeptical, began their own covert observations. Lieutenant Commander Alistair Vance, a man of science, meticulously cross-referenced each occurrence. The bell's accuracy is disquieting, he noted in a private journal entry. It seems to possess a dreadful memory. But the true horror began with the whispers. Not the bell's reverberations, but faint, human sounds that seemed to ride the very air disturbed by its chimes. Sailors on watch, pale and shaken, swore they heard names. Distinct, individual names, murmured in spectral voices, fading with the last vibrations of the bronze. "It was the first mate, sir," able seaman Thomas Finch reported, trembling, after the bell tolled 7 times over a forgotten fishing smack's grave. He heard William and Mary, then young Johnny, the very names of the crew lost that day, sir, as if they were calling from the deep. This was no mere mechanical anomaly. This was consciousness. This was impossible knowledge. A bell, rescued from the grave, now acted as a spectral cenotaph, marking the dead, calling their names. The mystery of the bell of the drowned had just begun to unfold, and it demanded an investigation. Join us as we delve deeper into this chilling maritime enigma. Like this video and subscribe to the Maritime Chronicler to ensure you don't miss a single clue. The HMS Serpent, once a vessel of proud naval power, became a ship haunted by its own chime. Captain Thorne, initially a man of logical dismissal, found his resolve eroding with each midnight toll. He ordered the bell lashed, its clapper secured, but no chain, no rope could silence the spectral mechanism. When midnight arrived, the bell would vibrate, the clapper would swing, and the tolls would begin as if an unseen hand, cold and unwavering, wielded it from the abyss. The very wood of the deck seems to hum with it, recorded Surgeon Major Alistair Finch, his medical detachment giving way to sheer bewilderment, a low, resonant thrumming preceding the first chime by mere seconds, as if the bell draws energy directly from the sea floor beneath us. The crew, once merely unsettled, was now gripped by a pervasive dread. The midnight watch became a crucible of fear. Sailors would gather in hushed groups, their eyes fixed on the bell, counting the tolls, dreading the whispers. Some claimed to see fleeting phosphorescent gleams in the water below during the chiming, like the eyes of the drowned, staring back from their perpetual night. The Santa Isabella itself, the bell's original vessel, became a focal point of the investigation. What dark history did it carry? She was a galleon of the Spanish Armada, sunk during a brutal storm in 1588, not by enemy cannon, but by the furious hand of the Atlantic. Over 300 souls perished with her, a significant portion of her crew and many soldiers. The bell, recovered from her resting place, was not merely an object. It was a fragment of a vast, tragic event. Naval archives, painstakingly consulted by Thorne's first lieutenant during a brief port stay in Plymouth, revealed tantalizing details. The Santa Isabella was a ship of ill omen even before her final voyage. Rumors had swirled around her construction, whispers of a curse laid upon her by a dispossessed artisan or a dark pact made by her first captain for unholy speed. These were dismissed as mere sailors' folklore, but in the shadow of the chiming bell, they took on a new, sinister weight. One particular log entry from a Spanish chronicler aboard a sister ship caught Lieutenant Vance's eye. The Isabella's bell, forged from a unique alloy, was said to possess an uncommon resonance. Her captain, Don Pedro de Valdez, believed it could speak to the depths. He would often strike it before battle, or in the face of a storm, as if communing with some unseen force. This wasn't a standard bell. It was a bell imbued with a purpose, or perhaps a burden. The question shifted from how the bell chimed to why it chimed. Was it a passive recorder, simply echoing the spectral energy of the dead? Or was it an active conduit, a bridge between the living and the drowned, chosen by some unfathomable force to bear witness to the sea's hidden graves? The Serpent continued its patrol, but it was no longer merely a warship. It was a floating observatory, its crew involuntary participants in a macabre experiment, sailing through a liquid graveyard, guided by the tolls of a haunted bell. The Serpent's eerie voyage continued, each midnight a fresh reminder of the bell's terrifying power. The whispers accompanying the tolls grew more distinct, more insistent, no longer just names, but fragments of cries, gasps, and the gurgle of water. The crew, once robust and boisterous, became gaunt, their eyes shadowed with sleepless nights. Even Captain Thorne, a man whose resolve was forged in naval battles, started to show the strain. He spent hours poring over charts, trying to predict the bell's next performance, trying to find a pattern beyond the obvious. "It's the very breath of the ocean's victims," muttered old Silas Blackwood, crossing himself after a particularly frantic sequence of chimes that spoke of a sudden, violent loss. Their last moments, caught in the bronze, waiting for us to pass over their forgotten graves. The bell's material composition itself became a topic of hushed speculation. Lieutenant Vance managed to obtain a small sample, scraped from an inconspicuous part of its rim during a rare moment of calm. His rudimentary tests, conducted in the ship's cramped surgeon's cabin, revealed an unusual density and a trace of an unknown metallic impurity. "It's not just bronze," Vance recorded. "There's something else in its matrix. Something that gives it this peculiar resonance, this receptivity." Was it an intentional addition by the Santa Isabella's original smith, or a consequence of its 2-century submersion? One theory, whispered among the officers, was that the bell had absorbed the death energy of the Santa Isabella's own crew. When the galleon sank, its bell would have been submerged with hundreds of dying men. Their final moments, their terror, their last breaths, somehow imprinted upon the metal. And now, like a monstrous magnet, it drew similar echoes from other sites of maritime tragedy. This idea found a chilling resonance in the historical accounts of the Santa Isabella's sinking. A survivor, rescued days later by a passing fishing boat, had spoken of the bell tolling wildly as the galleon went down, not from any human hand, but from the ship's violent death throes. "It screamed with the dying," the survivor had reportedly claimed, "a sound that tore the very soul from our bodies." Could this be the origin of the bell's morbid sentience? Its first traumatic tuning to the frequency of death. The psychological toll on the Serpent's crew was becoming critical. Morale plummeted. Men reported nightmares of drowning, of being dragged down by unseen hands. Discipline frayed. Captain Thorne, facing a potential mutiny born of sheer terror, knew he had to act. He considered casting the bell back into the sea, but something held him back. A morbid fascination, perhaps, or the historian's instinct to preserve an impossible artifact. Instead, he ordered the bell moved to the lowest hold, deep within the ship's belly, surrounded by cargo, hoping to muffle its midnight pronouncements. The move was arduous, the bell resisting as if with a malevolent will of its own. But even from the depths of the hold, its midnight chime, though fainter, still resonated through the hull, a spectral heartbeat echoing the sea's countless graves. The whispers, however, were now almost imperceptible, a faint, chilling hum beneath the deck plates. The Serpent continued its patrol, but it was no longer merely a warship. It was a floating observatory, its crew involuntary participants in a macabre experiment, sailing through a liquid graveyard, guided by the tolls of a haunted bell. The attempt to silence the bell of the drowned by burying it deep within the Serpent's hold was a failure. Its midnight tolls, though muffled, vibrated through the very keel of the ship, a deep, unsettling thrum that permeated every deck. The crew, now acutely aware of its presence, felt it more than heard it, a constant, low-frequency hum that seemed to resonate in their bones. The whispers, too, persisted, though now they seemed to emanate not from the bell itself but from the surrounding darkness, carried on the very currents of the ship's timbers. Captain Thorne, increasingly isolated by the haunting, began to experience vivid, waking dreams. He saw spectral ships, long-rotted timbers, and faces distorted by the deep. He found himself sketching charts of known wreck sites, not to navigate, but to cross-reference with the bell's nightly performances. His log, once a record of naval precision, began to include increasingly desperate personal notes. "The bell seems to know," he scrawled one night. "It is not merely reacting, it is aware." The unique alloy discovered by Lieutenant Vance became a crucial focus. Further, more refined tests, using a rudimentary galvanic cell constructed from scavenged copper and zinc, suggested the presence of minute traces of an unusual element, perhaps platinum or iridium, metals then scarcely understood. Its atomic structure, if I may hazard a guess, allows it to act as a receiver, Vance theorized. His voice hushed. It tunes into the residual energies of catastrophic events, particularly those involving extreme emotional discharge, fear, despair, the abrupt cessation of life. This scientific hypothesis, however tentative, offered a glimmer of rational explanation. Could the bell be a form of organic or semi-organic data recorder, somehow capturing the energetic imprint of death? The theory of place memory, the idea that strong emotions or traumatic events can somehow be imprinted on environments or objects, began to gain traction amongst the more educated officers. The bell, in this view, was not haunted by individual spirits, but by the raw, undifferentiated psychic echo of their final moments. But this theory struggled to explain the most chilling aspect, the specific tolling for the exact number of dead, and especially the whispering of names. How could mere energetic residue differentiate between individuals, or count them with such chilling accuracy? This pushed the phenomenon beyond the realm of simple place memory and into something far more profound, perhaps even malevolent. The bell's origin in the Santa Isabella continued to haunt their thoughts. The Spanish galleon had been part of the ill-fated Armada, a vessel steeped in national pride and religious fervor. What if the bell had been blessed or cursed during its forging? Ancient metallurgy often involved ritualistic elements, the incorporation of symbolic materials. Could a fragment of a saint's relic, or conversely, a piece of a heretic's bone, have been incorporated into its melt, imbuing it with supernatural properties? A frantic search through captured Spanish manifests, brought aboard by a prize crew from a recently defeated frigate, yielded a curious entry for the Santa Isabella, Campana de los Perdidos, Bell of the Lost, and a notation forged by Mateo de la Cruz, a master artisan from Toledo, renowned for his living metals. This was no ordinary bell. It was crafted by a man who claimed to infuse his works with a kind of soul. The whispers, the counting, the knowledge of the drowned. Perhaps it was not the sea that imprinted this knowledge, but the very intention of its creator, finally unleashed by its recovery from the deep. The serpent was no longer simply a ship. It was a vessel adrift in a sea of spectral data, its unwilling crew, the receivers of a horrific, ongoing broadcast. The revelation of the bell's original name, Campana de los Perdidos, and its maker, Mateo de la Cruz, deepened the mystery rather than clarifying it. Lieutenant Vance, driven by intellectual obsession, dedicated every spare moment to researching the enigmatic artisan. The name Mateo de la Cruz was indeed found in obscure guild records from Toledo, a city famed for its metalwork. He was described as a reclusive genius, whose techniques were unorthodox, and whose workshops were charged with an unusual atmosphere. He was said to temper his metals not just with fire and water, Vance read from a fragile, translated document, but with the breath of the living and the silence of the dead. A chilling phrase, given our current predicament. This suggested a deliberate, almost alchemical process aimed at imbuing the metal with some form of sentience or sensitivity. Was the bell designed to be a receiver of death, or was it an accidental, horrific byproduct of De La Cruz's esoteric practices? The psychological impact on the serpent's crew intensified. The perpetual, low thrum from the hold became a constant companion, a sub-audible reminder of the nightly horror. Sleep offered no escape. Dreams were plagued by the faces of the drowned, their whispered names echoing in the dark. Symptoms of extreme stress, hallucinations, and paranoia began to manifest. One young midshipman, driven to the brink, attempted to throw himself overboard, claiming they were calling his name from below. He was restrained, but the incident underscored the escalating crisis. Captain Thorne, in a desperate attempt to regain control, ordered the bell sealed entirely within a lead-lined chest, hoping the heavy metal would block whatever energy it was transmitting. The sealing process was fraught with tension. As the final rivet was struck, a collective shudder went through the ship, and a single, deafening clang resonated from within the chest, as if the bell itself protested its imprisonment. That night, for the first time in weeks, the bell remained silent. A collective, uneasy sigh of relief swept through the serpent. But the relief was short-lived. The silence was more terrifying than the tolls. The whispers, no longer riding the bell's vibrations, seemed to fill the very air of the ship. They were everywhere now, a cacophony of spectral voices, disembodied and relentless, calling out names from every shadow. The silence of the bell had not ended the haunting. It had merely amplified it, turning the entire ship into a resonating chamber for the lost. It has merely shifted its voice, Captain Thorne recorded, his hand visibly shaking. The metal was but a focus. The presence is now diffuse. It is within the ship, within us. This implied a terrifying progression. The bell was no longer merely a tool or a conduit. It had somehow permeated the very fabric of the serpent, perhaps even the minds of its crew. The HMS Serpent, once proud, was now a vessel adrift in a sea of spectral data, its unwilling crew the receivers of a horrific, ongoing broadcast. And the bell, silent but omnipresent, had become the ultimate, unseen orchestrator of their dread. The silence of the bell of the drowned, now sealed in lead, was a deceptive reprieve. The cacophony of disembodied whispers that replaced its tolls was infinitely more terrifying. They permeated the ship, a constant, low murmur of names and dying gasps that eroded sanity. The crew's descent into collective delusion and fear accelerated. Men huddled together, refusing to go on watch alone. Shadows seemed to writhe with unseen figures. The serpent was no longer merely haunted. It was actively possessed by the echoes of the ocean's dead. Captain Thorne, his face gaunt, his eyes bloodshot, found himself pacing his cabin, his gaze fixed on the spot where the bell had once hung. The silence from the hold was a malevolent presence. He began to question his own sanity, battling the whispers that seemed to claw at the edges of his mind, trying to draw him into the watery abyss. Lieutenant Vance, ever the scientist, observed a strange phenomenon. The ship's internal temperature, particularly in the lower decks, seemed to drop significantly at midnight, regardless of the ambient sea temperature. Compasses, too, occasionally spun wildly, and the ship's chronometers would briefly stutter, as if time itself faltered in the presence of the spectral energy. A localized distortion of the electromagnetic field, Vance theorized, sketching frantic diagrams. The sheer psychic discharge, it's affecting our instruments. It's affecting reality. This led to a chilling hypothesis. What if the bell, in its 2 centuries submerged, had not merely absorbed energies, but had become a nexus, a focal point for the very consciousness of the drowned? If the ocean floor was a vast, silent graveyard, then the bell was its voice, and now its brain. By attempting to silence it, they had merely forced its influence to spread, to become diffuse, infecting the entire vessel. Historical precedents, though few and far between, offered unsettling parallels. Tales of ghost ships sailing without crews, or vessels whose bells would toll in port with no one near them, were now viewed through a terrifying new lens. Was the Serpent slowly becoming one of them, its crew being spiritually supplanted by the lost souls the bell now commanded? A forgotten maritime superstition found in an old sailor's almanac spoke of vessels that carry too much death. Such ships were said to become heavy with souls, eventually sinking under the weight of their spectral cargo. The Serpent, carrying the bell of the drowned, seemed to be fulfilling this grim prophecy. The constant dread, the lack of sleep, the pervasive whispers. It was draining the life from the crew, making them vulnerable. The whispers, however, were not always random. On several occasions, during moments of extreme terror or exhaustion, individual sailors reported hearing specific, detailed accounts of a shipwreck. Not just names, but brief, terrifying glimpses into a final moment. The splintering of a mast, the roar of a rogue wave, the cold embrace of the deep. It was as if the bell, through the ship, was forcing them to relive the deaths it recorded. The HMS Serpent was no longer merely a ship. It was a floating tomb, its crew trapped within a living mausoleum, subjected to the endless, agonizing replay of the sea's tragic history. The silence of the bell was the silence of a predator, waiting for its prey to succumb. The Serpent's descent into a floating nightmare reached its nadir. The crew, ravaged by sleeplessness and spectral torment, was on the verge of collapse. Discipline had all but evaporated, replaced by a desperate, shared terror. Men saw apparitions in their peripheral vision, heard their own names whispered by unseen mouths, and woke screaming from dreams of drowning. The ship's chronometers now frequently froze at midnight, only to jump forward an hour later, as if time itself recoiled from the bell's influence. Captain Thorne, driven by the need to protect his crew and his own fraying sanity, made a drastic decision. He would return the bell to the deep. He reasoned that if the bell was a nexus, then its return to the ocean floor, its original domain, might break its horrific connection. He gathered the remaining officers, their faces pale and drawn, and laid out his plan. "We will retrieve the bell from the hold," he declared, his voice hoarse, "and commit it back to the sea, not to its original resting place, but to the deepest trench we can find, where no man, living or dead, can reach it again." The task of unsealing the lead-lined chest was fraught with peril. As the first rivet was loosened, a blast of icy air erupted from the hold, carrying with it a concentrated wave of whispers, a chorus of anguished voices that momentarily deafened those nearby. The ship groaned, its timbers flexing as if in protest, or perhaps in agony. It was clear the bell did not wish to return to its silent grave. With immense effort, using block and tackle, the heavy chest was hoisted from the hold and secured on deck. The air around it felt heavy, charged with an invisible force. The whispers intensified, now seeming to swirl around the chest itself, a vortex of spectral sound. Lieutenant Vance, observing with a mixture of dread and scientific fascination, noted a strange phosphorescence clinging to the lead, almost like a living slime. "It's a biological reaction," he mumbled, "or an energetic one. The bell is fighting." The plan was to sail to the deepest part of their charts, a known abyssal plain, and cast the bell into the crushing darkness. But the bell seemed to exert a perverse will. The Serpent's navigation became erratic. Compasses spun wildly, Currents seemed to shift against them, and the wind, usually a reliable ally, became fickle, pushing them off course, always away from the desired coordinates. It was as if the bell, from within its leaden tomb, was actively resisting its fate, guiding the ship away from its intended disposal. "It knows where we intend to take it," whispered Surgeon Major Finch, his eyes wide with fear. "It doesn't want to be alone in the dark." The idea that the bell possessed not just memory, but intention was a terrifying leap into the unknown. It was no longer a cursed object. It was a malevolent entity, playing a deadly game of cat and mouse with its captors. The HMS Serpent, once a vessel of proud naval power, was now locked in a silent, desperate struggle against an artifact of the deep, an ancient bell that defied logic, mocked science, and wielded the very souls of the drowned as its weapon. Their only hope was to outwit the impossible, or risk becoming just another name whispered by the bell of the drowned. The Serpent's struggle against the bell of the drowned became a battle of wills. Each attempt to steer towards the abyssal trench was met with inexplicable resistance. The ship seemed to drift, to veer, to stubbornly refuse the commanded course. The crew, already at breaking point, began to see the bell not as an object, but as a sentient, malevolent being. "It's alive, I tell ye!" screamed a deckhand, pointing a trembling finger at the lead-lined chest. "It's got a mind of its own, and it don't want to go back to the black." Captain Thorne, though outwardly composed, felt the insidious creep of despair. The whispers were no longer just names. They were accusations, threats, promises of a cold, watery grave. He began to question if he was truly fighting an object, or if some collective entity, a legion of the drowned, had manifested through the bell, seeking to claim the Serpent as its own. Lieutenant Vance, however, found a new, unsettling pattern in the ship's erratic movements. The bell wasn't guiding them randomly. It was pulling them towards a specific, uncharted point, a region of the ocean not marked on any map, a vast, featureless expanse of deep water that had always been avoided due to its lack of landmarks and persistent, disorienting currents. This was not a place of known wrecks. This was something else. "It's not trying to escape a grave," Vance deduced, his voice tight with a terrifying realization. "It's trying to find one, or perhaps create one." The Serpent was being led to an unknown destination, a place the bell deemed significant. Was it a place of immense, undiscovered loss? Or was the bell, in its malevolence, seeking a new, grander stage for its macabre performance? Perhaps even orchestrating a new tragedy? The idea that the bell could instigate disaster, rather than merely record it, was a terrifying escalation of its powers. Meanwhile, the physiological effects on the crew worsened. Beyond the nightmares and hallucinations, men began to suffer from extreme dehydration, despite ample water stores. Their skin became dry and cracked, their eyes sunken. It was as if the constant exposure to the death energy was literally draining the life from them, desiccating their very souls. Surgeon Major Finch, baffled, could offer no medical explanation. "Their bodies are rejecting water," he reported, "as if they are already succumbing to the thirst of the deep." This phenomenon added a new layer of dread. The bell was not just tormenting them psychologically, it was physically preparing them for the same fate as the drowned. It was turning them into its next collection, its next set of names to whisper. The ship finally drifted into a colossal, silent vortex of currents, a place of unnerving calm in the midst of the turbulent ocean. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of salt, and something else, something ancient and cold. The whispers reached a crescendo, a roaring chorus of the lost, their voices no longer distinct, but a unified wail of countless souls. The lead-lined chest began to vibrate violently, the metal groaning under an unseen pressure. Captain Thorne, gripping his spyglass, peered into the swirling depths. There, in the water, not distant, but directly beneath them, he saw it. Not a wreck, but something far, far larger. A colossal, dark shape, indistinct in the murky water, but unmistakably artificial. Something immense and ancient, not marked on any chart. A structure of impossible scale, rising from the abyssal plain. The bell had not led them to a graveyard. It had led them to a monument built by what or whom? The Serpent had finally reached the bell's true home, And it was not a place of rest, but a place of unimaginable, terrifying power. The immense, unmapped structure beneath the Serpent defied all known maritime history. It was a colossal, dark form, a submerged citadel of impossible geometry, rising from the abyssal plain. Its surface was not of natural rock or coral, but of some unknown, cyclopean material, absorbing the faint light filtering from above. This was the Belle's true destination, its home, and its presence amplified the ship's haunting to unbearable levels. The whispers, a unified wail of the lost, now thundered through the Serpent's hull, a constant deafening roar of spectral agony. The lead-lined chest, containing the Belle of the Drowned, vibrated so violently it threatened to tear its fastenings. The ship itself groaned and shuddered, its timbers stressed by an unseen, immense pressure. The compasses spun like mad, the chronometers froze, and the very air grew cold and heavy, tasting of brine and ancient despair. Captain Thorne, his face a mask of grim determination, ordered the anchor dropped. The chain rattled into the depths, a desperate attempt to hold the ship steady against the unnerving currents that seemed to emanate from the structure below. He knew they were trapped, drawn by the Belle into a place beyond human comprehension. Lieutenant Vance, battling the disorienting whispers, desperately tried to make sense of the visual. "It's not a natural formation," he stammered, peering through the spyglass into the murky depths. "Too regular, too vast. It resembles nothing known to man. A city, a fortress, a tomb?" He theorized that the Belle was not merely recording death, but communing with something on or within this structure. Perhaps the structure itself was a repository of souls, or a machine designed to harvest them. The Belle of the Drowned was not merely an artifact. It was a key, a component in some ancient, unfathomable mechanism. And by recovering it, by bringing it back into the active world, they had inadvertently reactivated it, causing it to seek its original purpose, its true home. Suddenly, from the depths of the structure, a low, resonant hum began. It was not the chime of the bell, but a deeper, more profound vibration that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the chest, in the skull. It was a sound that carried immense power, a primordial frequency that spoke of unimaginable age and cosmic scale. As this hum intensified, the Belle of the Drowned, still sealed in its lead chest, began to glow faintly through the cracks in its prison, a sickly green phosphorescence. The whispers on deck ceased abruptly, replaced by a single, unified, impossibly loud voice that boomed from the depths of the ocean, echoing in the very bones of the Serpent. It was not human. It was ancient, vast, and filled with an alien sorrow. The language was unintelligible, yet its meaning was terrifyingly clear. A lament, a demand, a terrible hunger. The crew collapsed, clutching their heads, screaming, some bleeding from their ears. Captain Thorne, though on his knees, gritted his teeth, forcing himself to look into the water. The colossal structure below began to emit its own faint green light, illuminating the swirling currents around it, revealing more of its impossible scale. This was not a place of rest, but a place of immense, terrifying power. The HMS Serpent, its timbers groaning, its crew driven to the brink of madness by the Belle's connection to the Leviathan beneath, was no longer merely a ship. It was a sacrifice, offered by an unwitting crew to an ancient, hungry entity that had waited centuries for its Belle to call it awake. The colossal hum from the structure below intensified, vibrating through the Serpent's keel, bypassing bone and muscle to resonate directly in the soul. The alien voice, a primordial lament, filled every space on deck, shattering the last fragments of sanity. Men writhed, clawing at their heads, blood weeping from ears, eyes rolling back in their sockets. Some simply collapsed, their bodies convulsing, their life force seemingly draining into the deck beneath them. Captain Thorne, his face contorted in agony, watched as the lead-lined chest containing the Belle of the Drowned buckled. The heavy metal groaned, then shrieked, as if under the pressure of an immense internal force. Rivets popped like pistol shots. The lead plates tore open, peeling back like rotten fruit, And there it was, unobscured, the bell of the drowned, pulsating with an emerald phosphorescence. Now free, it did not swing. It did not need a clapper. With an impossible, deafening clang, the bell tolled, not a measured count for individual souls, but a single, continuous, overwhelming chime that resonated through the entire ocean. It was a sound of immense power, a sonic gateway, a summoning. As the bell shrieked its endless peal, the colossal structure below the serpent began to change. Immense, unseen mechanisms shifted. Parts of its dark surface opened, revealing abyssal depths that swallowed light. From these newly formed chasms, a powerful, unseen suction emanated, a force that seized the serpent with an inexorable grip. The ship, already battered and broken, shuddered violently. Its timbers screamed in protest. The remaining crew, those still conscious, were pulled towards the glowing bell, their bodies desiccating further, their eyes wide with terror as their life seemed to ebb away. Lieutenant Vance, his mind reeling, understood. The bell was not merely a recorder, it was a harvester. It had brought them here to be absorbed. The resonance, Vance gasped, his voice a ragged whisper. It's drawing the psychic energy. It's feeding. The serpent began to sink, not slowly, but with a terrifying, accelerating plunge. The immense suction from the structure below pulled it down faster and faster into the glowing maw. The bell, now pulsing with a furious, triumphant light, was the last thing Captain Thorne saw as the cold, dark water engulfed the deck. Its endless chime became a final, roaring hymn of consumption. The HMS Serpent vanished beneath the waves, swallowed whole by the abyssal entity, leaving no trace but a brief, swirling disturbance on the surface. The Bell of the Drowned had found its ultimate purpose, delivering its final, largest cargo of souls. And in the depths, the immense structure, now satiated, dimmed its glow, returning to its silent, ancient vigil, waiting for its bell to call again. The HMS Serpent was never seen again. Admiralty records simply list her as lost at sea with all hands. No wreckage, no survivors, no explanation. But the legend of the Bell of the Drowned, though whispered in hushed tones among a select few, persists. What was that colossal structure in the deep? An ancient, forgotten civilization's monument? An extraterrestrial machine fallen from the stars? Or something far older, far more alien, dwelling in the crushing darkness of the abyssal plain, feeding on the psychic echoes of the drowned? The bell itself, if it truly possessed consciousness, now rests with its master, silent once more, awaiting its next awakening. Was its journey aboard the Serpent a mere accident, or a deliberate macabre pilgrimage, orchestrated by an intelligence beyond our understanding? The terrifying implication remains. The ocean is not just a vast, indifferent expanse. It holds secrets that defy our science, entities that mock our understanding, and sometimes a fragment of that unknown world surfaces, a relic that reveals a glimpse into a terrifying truth, a truth that reminds us that the deep is not empty, and some of its inhabitants are always listening, always waiting. What are your theories on the Bell of the Drowned and the colossal entity it served? Share your thoughts and hypotheses in the comments below.